Man, I love Sacramento. I do. Between all the people that I've known for 3 decades in both public and private sector, there's a bunch of good people out there. This is a very important effort tonight for those of us that have fought the battle for a few years. It's always been an interesting process to learn to do business with government. It's got its own unique set of rules and policies. And for those of us that have been fighting the battle for decades, it has gone through numerous iterations. I'm pleased to announce, though, that there is a new sheriff in town. There is a group that is extremely dedicated to simplifying and streamlining the process of standardizing it so that you know what to expect and when to expect, speeding it up so that procurements that are dependent on technology aren't implemented after the 3rd generation has passed. Tonight, we're going to hear from the STAR team, the team that's dedicated to the new procurement process. And Andrea Wallin-Rohmann is here to kick things off. So at this point in time, please give her a warm round of applause.
So I'm really hoping not to have to be up here long enough to drink that glass of water, but for any of you that know me know that I have a great ability to talk in public. So one never knows how long I could be up here. Well, I'm really excited to be here, and as Russ indicated, you know, when I came into the Department of Technology just over a year ago, one of the very first charges I was given was to get this done, was to get the new stage gate model stood up, and to get us on a better path of how we start to plan and approve to deliver good IT in the state of California. And so I took that charge very seriously. And the first thing I did was grab some of the smartest people that I had seen that were working within the organization and dedicated them to this effort. And so tonight I've brought with me that team, and I'll introduce them here in a minute, but it was really through their efforts that we're where we are today. What had been being done on this effort was, you know, the building of a model, you know, in a cubicle. And it's just not kind of the way I do business. And so what we did is we opened that up and we brought into play all of the departments in every agency so that every agency was represented in what you're going to see today. They all had a play in providing input, in sitting in on the work groups that we had. And this effort took a good 10 months to really get the product to where it is today. And part of why we wanted to reach out to the vendor community today is because while the policies were released December 31st, they don't go into effect until July 1. And the reason we did that was intentional. It was to be able to put the policies out there, to be able to have them visible, and start to run some pilots through them, to give us an opportunity to make adjustments in the documentation and adjustments in the process before we actually put it into live play with every department, with every project. And it's in doing that that we believe that we'll be able to come up with a model at the end of the day that works for the betterment of state government, hence the vendor partnership. Because at the end of the day, we don't do this alone, and we recognize that. You know, we can't build IT without the collective partnerships with the vendor. We can't get projects through the process without the collective relationship with the vendor. And so I'm very appreciative that all of you have come out here today to participate in hearing about the STAR project, but really more importantly, the stage gate model. Because I think there's some information that you'll hear today that will open up some opportunities for you that we typically have not had in the places that you're going to see them today in the approval process. By that, what I mean is that there's a lot of upfront work that has to be done now. Typically, when we went into projects You know, we documented as much as we thought we knew and we could document. It took us a few years to get there. We went out, procured. That took us a few years to get through. By the time we brought the vendor in as our integrator, we're likely implementing technology that is 4 to 5 years old. And we're implementing against processes that we maybe or maybe didn't even document. And so we spend the first part of an implementation effort really going back and revisiting all of those business processes and looking at what is it that we really are trying to do, and then rediscussing the requirements and really trying to get an understanding with our now vendor partner integrator on what it is that we were wanting to do, and then making all these adjustments and modifications and going through the contract process of amending the contract so that it allows for the opportunity for the vendor to deliver to what we now know we need. And then very likely doing a second or third SPR, special project report, right, to readjust timeline and budget and everything else. And all of that drives extensive delays on projects. And those delays are not just costly, but those delays then result in us, at the end of the day, implementing technology that's probably more like 7 or 8 years old from the day that we really started the overall effort, which results in probably poor technology being implemented in the state of California, and we want to get away from that. And so what we've gotten to now is a recognition that that information is needed up front. Understanding your business need, understanding your business processes, understanding your requirements, that's all needed up front. That's all new. Those are all activities that we historically have been somewhat reliant and dependent on the vendor community to help us with. But, you know, again, not till later on, right? So now those are going to become very upfront activities. And it's why we felt it was very important for all of you as our vendor partners to understand these documents, to understand what the information is that we're going to be asking for from state departments, to understand how that translates from what was an FSR to what now is the stage gate model. Because unlike what we've been doing over the past year and a half, where the stage 1 business analysis kicked off the idea of a project, but then the department had to go back in and write an FSR, we will no longer be writing FSRs. So we can all cheer for that. Okay, at least I will. I've written far too many FSRs in my time. But so we're out of that business, and we're really into asking for right pieces of information at the right time to make the right kind of decisions about delivering good IT in California. And hopefully that's what you'll see today. We've laid this out in a way that, you know, we ask that you hold questions until various stages. So we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions as we get through components of the presentation. But it's a lot of information, a lot of material, and in some cases, I think some of those questions will answer themselves as we get through each piece of it. So with that, again, I thank you for your time. I thank you for your dedication to delivering good IT in the state of California. And I would like to introduce for you our team that will be presenting today. So first off, we have Andrea Hoffman. Andrea has been the lead on this effort for the past year. And we'll continue to lead as we get into the development of the final 2 stages, which is stage 3 and 4. With her is Patrick Dennis. Patrick, along with Manveer Bola, have been co-sub-leads over the 2 major components of the effort. And then Alicia Wong. And she has done a phenomenal job as our communication and marketing specialist. And why you may recognize the logo or may see information out there and see the word STAR and think that STAR is this overall new system is because of all of the great efforts that Alicia has put in place. What you will find is that while we call it the STAR project, it is really the stage gate model for project approval, and you'll start to see it transition from being called STAR to being called stage gate. That's one and the same. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring Andrea Hoffman up.
Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. So for our presentation today, there's several areas that we want to cover. First, you know, the business drivers and the impacts, specifically the impacts to you all, the vendor partners in the room. We want to go over what our mission is, and I just want to touch a little bit on what stage gate is versus project approval lifecycle versus STAR. So there's been some confusion out there with that. We're also going to talk about the stage gate model or the framework, and we're going to go through each stages, and Patrick's going to carry us through that. Just a little note that the stage gate model was selected based on research on the federal and Canadian models. We're also going to take a look at digesting what that stage gate model is into a procurement perspective, so I think you'll find some value in that. We're going to go over some new concepts. So with FSR, it's just basically a one standard process, but we're adding a lot of collaboration into the new stage gate model. So we're going to go over the concept of collaboration review and collaboration development. We're also going to go through the detailed walkthrough of the forms, so you can look for areas of opportunity in contracting or working with the state, especially around the business analysis piece or establishing the business case. And in the forms, we're also going to look at the why. So why did we come up with the content that we came up with on these forms, and why are we asking it the way we're asking it? So we hope to answer that question for you as well. We're also going to go through our stage gate to FSR crosswalk. So what are the components of the feasibility study report that are now in the stage gate, and where do they fit into that stage gate model? And then from stage gate model, what are the new components that haven't been done before? And lastly, we'll go through the timeline, basically what's done and what's coming. Just to point out real quick before I forget, there's some information on STAR. You'll see a brochure as well as a packet. So as Patrick and Manvi are going through the details of the forms, you will have that available to you. The forms that you see in the packet are basically a Word version. We will be converting those to an InfoPath format. Okay, business drivers. So why are we changing? Basically, a 30-year-old process. Feasibility study report was around when mainframe computers were in existence. Talk about slow and aged. Part of this process is keeping up with the technology changes. So 30-year-old process does not align well with old technology. Today we have business users that are changing their mind almost on a daily basis, not understanding how technology works or fits into their life. So really we need a process that can keep pace with the business needs and the changes that we have in technology that move very rapidly. The other thing is that feasibility study report doesn't inherently focus on the business need or the business case. A lot of times departments write feasibility study reports. It's an open narrative format. They're creating a story, and then sometimes they don't even know what that story is. So we're hoping that our new stage gate model will fix that. The FSR process, one size fits all. So every department, every project has to complete a feasibility study report, irregardless of the complexity, the level of risk, or the amount of investment. So that doesn't really make sense, and it's not really efficient to doing business, I would think, from the vendor partner community. We need something that better aligns with the risk, the complexity, and what really makes sense. In addition, the FSR today is not scalable, so that's another area we want to make sure that we hit in this new stage gate model. And again, just to emphasize, there's going to be more collaboration built into the actual framework that you'll see when Patrick walks through it. The other element that we really want to hit is we need to get a more realistic cost and schedule baseline. A lot of times departments are forced into a special project report situation before they even start the project. They're also forced to go in front of the legislature a lot of times and ask for more money. And that doesn't make a lot of sense, and it doesn't make a lot of people happy to have to go through that before you even start a project. And again, the agencies and state entities, we have representation from all 11 agencies on the actual development of the deliverables you're going to see today. A lot of extensive dedication by the AIOs and CIOs, and they were very, very open with us in sharing their pain points and their lessons learned. So a lot of that was actually taken into consideration, and you'll see some of the results of that today. So vendor partner impacts. These can also be looked at as benefits or changes. I wouldn't look at this word as a negative. It's actually a very positive. You can expect to have departments that have more improved project planning through the stage gate model. Because we are going to use benchmarks at each gate. Has the department done the planning requisite planning that we wanted them to do up until that point? If not, then we consult with them and we ask them to go back and fill in the gaps where they may have missed something. Or we'll say, hey, you guys did a really good job. You're okay to move forward. But again, we'll go into the details of those concepts later with Patrick. The other area we really wanted to look at is let's leverage the lessons learned in the state. We had a lot of major IT project fails. We had a lot of successes. So what worked and what didn't work, and how can we make those changes and make those changes early enough that they make a difference in project planning. The other thing that we want to leverage with lessons learned is in the FSR, we basically looked at risk up front. In this new model, it's more of an iterative risk evaluation at each stage gate. So we're going to be looking at risk all throughout the project, not necessarily just up front before a project's approved. Organizational readiness, that's a whole new concept as well. We are looking at what are the fundamental pieces of an organization that needs to be in place. Is it their governance, their strategic planning, the major components that need to sit at the foundation before a department even considers an IT project. We have found that that is an essential component, so we've built those elements into the stage gate model as well. And the other aspect that is very important for the audience today is the engagement of procurement. So you'll see, starting in stage gate 2 with market research, we're going to be engaging the procurement community early, and procurement is a major piece of the stage gate model before a project is approved, which is a difference than how it is with FSR, where procurement comes into play after a project is approved. The other thing that we're looking for a positive impact is we want to standardize the tools and forms. So the forms that you'll see today are very structured and very guided, so the departments know what planning components need to be in place in order to get their projects approved. You'll also notice a lot of check boxes, drop downs, not a whole lot of narrative like the FSR. So that will help in a lot of ways to capture data for future reporting, and it'll help departments focus on the content that needs to be developed. There's some tools that we're developing to help support departments. One of them is a market research guidelines. We're currently in development with stage 3, so we're identifying other areas that can help departments prepare for procurement. We are also looking at helping in the area of requirements. So we have requirements guidelines that were released with the policy in December, and that is a way to synchronize and align statewide the types of requirements that we're getting. So we're building requirements into the stage gate deliverables. We're also working on an organizational readiness self-assessment. That is not part of STAR, but is a result of STAR project, and that is being handled by our Deputy Director of the IT Project Oversight and Consulting Division, and that will be rolled out separately, but it will be a detailed checklist for departments to look at. What do I as an organization need to be prepared for before I undertake an IT project? And again, the structured and guided approach is really to help departments, and it's also to help you know what to expect when you're proposing on projects. Okay, so our mission, it's pretty simple, but it's very powerful. We want to transform the IT project approval process to improve the planning, quality, value, and likelihood of success for technology projects being undertaken by the state of California. So just a simple clarification, we are implementing a stage gate model, which is sometimes referred to as the framework. You'll also hear the words project approval lifecycle. Project approval lifecycle is more of the process that we're applying to the stage gate model, and STAR is implementing both of those. So with that, fasten your seatbelts and get ready, because we're going to be taking a really deep dive and drink lots of coffee or something. Yeah. So I'm going to introduce Patrick Dennis, and he's going to go through the stage gate framework and the S1BA form.
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Patrick Dennis, as Andrea said. I'm pleased to be here tonight to present this information to you. I'm going to start with presenting the stage gate model, which is really our framework which we built the STAR project and the new project approval lifecycle upon. So the project approval, the stage gate model has 4 distinct stages that are separated by 4 gates of approval. The stage 1 business analysis, which was originally placed into policy back in September of 2013. Some of you may have seen or may be familiar with those forms or may have taken a look at them. That's really where you set up your business case. That's really where you establish the business need for this particular initiative. And I'll get into that a little bit deeper here in a second. I'm going to walk you through the stages at first, then we'll go back and we'll get into the details themselves. The stage 2 is the stage 2 alternatives analysis. So between stage 1 and stage 2 is really part and parcel of what the majority of the components of the feasibility study report. Stage 2 is the alternatives analysis, where you begin to take a look at alternatives out there to meet your business need. Stage 3 is the procurement analysis process. That's where we've actually taken activities and planning that used to take place after project approval, pulled it into the project approval life cycle, and we're looking to gain some benefits from that, which I'll touch on in a bit. And then stage 4 is actually the solution analysis stage. That's the last stage of the stage gate model, and that's where we do the actual RFP or IFB solicitation. We select vendors and begin to baseline project activities. So just to familiarize yourselves with the picture that you're seeing here, you'll notice that there's some bright colored lights and stars across the bottom. The stoplights indicate the gates of approval, so that's where there's an opportunity for a go, no-go decision there. And then the stars themselves represent what we're calling collaborative reviews. And I'll touch on some details about what those collaborative reviews are and who the stakeholders are that are present at those collaborative review meetings. Across the bottom, that's okay. Across the bottom, she's just trying to mess me up, so no. Across the bottom, you'll see the arrow right there on the top. It says Department of Technology Oversight and State Entity Collaboration. That's a very important part of what we've been doing with the STAR project and the new project approval life cycle, is really taking a look at how do we take advantage of opportunities, what we're calling opportunities for engagement. And I'll get into that in a little bit. And then we have a phased release beginning in late 2014. So this presentation that you're going to see today is primarily focused on the stage 1 business analysis and the stage 2 alternatives analysis. So we're going to present those forms to you. That policy was released back in December 30th, as Andrea Wallin-Rohmann said earlier. We are going to talk about stage 3 and stage 4 to put everything in context for you tonight. But the stage 1 and stage 2 is our primary focus, to be able to communicate to you the policies that we have that are currently going to be in effect July 1 of 2015. So the stage 1 business analysis. So when we first got together with the project, we put the project together back in April of 2014. And we reached out to agencies and state entities across the state asking for participation and support. And we got about 30 or 40 different members from all 11 agencies represented on the team. And we started really taking a look at the current stage 1 business analysis that was out there. We took a look at lessons learned. We'd had a year of processes to work with that stage 1 business analysis, and so we had an opportunity to work out some of the kinks. And we also had some comments and some pain points from our stakeholders on that. And so one of the first things that we did is we took a look at the current stage 1 business analysis and set forth to improve upon it, right? And so some of the things that we did is we added the organizational readiness component to it. There were studies performed and as part of taking a look at project approvals and what was making projects go wrong. And one of the things that came out of those studies and those analyses were the fact that agencies and state entities really lacked the fundamental organizational readiness that Andrea touched on to really make decisions. You know, is there a governance process in place? Is the support there from a leadership capacity? Is the organization ready to take on a project of the nature that they're proposing? And so that was one of the major changes that we made to the existing stage 1 business analysis. We added a good look at organizational readiness and stakeholder engagement for the new stage 1 business analysis. In the stage 2 alternatives analysis, we get into that documentation that Andrea was talking about. You know, current business processes. How well do you understand them? How well does the agency and state entity understand the current business that they're doing? the current business processes that are be impacted by changing or implementing some type of a new solution on those business processes. We formally added in the concept of market research to stage 2. That's a formal requirement now where we have agencies and state entities tell us about their market research experience. So how much market research did you do? Who did you speak with? Was it seminars? Did you have presentations? Did you have formal market research? So tell us about that. Tell us about the time that you spent doing that. And tell us about how aged that market research is. How current is it? So you can take a look at what was out there to meet your business need and create and assess your problem, your business problem. We developed what we're calling mid-level solution requirements in stage 2. That's really your FSR level requirements. What we're doing in the stage gate model is we're progressively elaborating information. So when you get to the end and you have all 4 stages documented, you really have what we're calling an approval package. So as we move through, in stage 1, you're developing your business objectives, and those are really your first level requirements. Those are your first level business requirements in stage 1. Well, we mature those in stage 2 to a level of granularity that helps with alternative analysis to be able to compare alternatives to each other. And so we came up with a concept of mid-level solution requirements and guidance for agencies and state entities in building a structure around those requirements. So one thing that you'll see for all stage 2 alternatives analysis as they move forward in these project approval lifecycle deliverables is you'll see consistency in the information and how it's conveyed in these documents. That was lacking in the feasibility study report, quite frankly, and you got different flavors of and different types of requirements. So we added some structure to that, and we hope that helps out in finding the most viable alternative. In stage 2, you also identify your solution alternatives. So we ask for levels of detail on what types of alternatives did you consider. Tell us about those alternatives. Tell us whether or not they're, you'll see the little boxes in there, the COTS, MOTS, existing, custom, or cloud first. And that really touches on, are you going to be looking to a cloud solution to support the policy that was most recently released, or will you be looking to have some other type of implementation strategy for your technology? And then we compare that to, the information in the alternatives analysis to see whether or not that's the correct choice. And so we'll have that information also reviewed and evaluated by members of the Department of Technology and critical partners to see if that's the most viable alternative to meet the business problem successfully. We have elaboration on the recommended solution on stage 2. We talk about the procurement and staffing strategy. So this is a new component as well. One of the guiding principles or fundamental things we try to achieve with the stage gate model is to try to mitigate risk as early and often as possible. So what you'll see is actually some of the elements that are happening in the next stages, we've actually pulled them forward as when they're important and when they're relevant to start talking about and start having those conversations. So in stage 2, we start your first portion of the procurement and staffing strategy. How are you going to go about procuring and purchasing your solution and your services that support the integration of that solution? And then we get into a high-level project timeline at that phase 2, at stage 2, because we want to take a look at the projected timeline and how we can fit that into the budget cycle if needed and other deliverables as well. So in stage 3 is the procurement analysis, and that's really your pre-solicitation activities. That's the development of the solution requirements for your RFP or IFB, whatever your procurement vehicle might be, and actually developing the request for proposal itself. Now the document, the actual picture only has those 2 elements in there, but there's other project readiness stuff that's going on as well. So there's project management planning that takes place at that phase, and so although they're not represented in that particular picture, there is activities there that are going on behind the scenes from a project management perspective and from a project readiness perspective. And so once the stage 3 procurement's developed, the statewide technology procurement division and the Department of Technology and critical partners are in agreement that the solicitation is ready to place out on the streets, then that's when the vendor RFP solicitation takes place. And so we have a pre-solicitation or pre-vetting that we're going to be doing of the proposals to solicit vendor feedback on the requirements, which is really an informal vetting of the requirements in order to gain feedback. That's one of the improvements that we're currently making in the statewide technology procurement division, is to open up some of that collaboration and some of those discussions. So you can take a look at what's out there and get viable feedback that we can use as part of the approval life cycle. You have the vendor selection in stage 4. Vendor contract management has also been added. You know, there's going to be some project readiness in that area as far as how the agencies and state entities manage contracts. And then we're going to assess the project readiness. Baseline the project, which is really a baseline of cost, schedule, and scope. Everybody's in agreement of what we're trying to do and the time in which we're going to take care of those particular deliverables, and then we reach out to the Department of Finance and Legislature for approval for any budget change proposals or any budget requests that are necessary to support purchasing the solution. And so that's the stage gate model itself. And really what we've done is we've taken this and broken it down into an iterative approval, as opposed to the feasibility study report, which was a one-time opportunity to take a look at the critical factors of a proposed initiative and make a judgment at that time. So we have an opportunity of go, no-go decisions that support making solid business decisions, and we're excited about that. So any questions on the stage gate model? I'll take questions at this time.
How long is this cycle?
You know, we've been having different conversations about that. We're currently working with our critical partners and internally. We have a dependency on the budget cycle, right? And so the budget cycle is not going to change for STAR. So regardless of how hard we asked, they were not budging. So we've assessed this, and it's really about 18 months or so. I think anywhere from 12 to 18 months from beginning to end, right? That's really going to depend. Let me put a caveat on that, right? That's also going to depend about the type of initiative it is, how large it is, how complex it is, and how much rigor we need to apply to the approval. So one thing that we've been able to do is kind of scale this project approval life cycle, scale the amount of rigor, which was one of our guiding principles moving forward, was to not treat everybody the same. So those projects that are of a little bit less risk, you know, we don't have to worry about them as much. Everything's pretty solid. There's not a lot of change to manage. They're going to move through here much quicker, whereas opposed to some that maybe aren't really well prepared or well thought out, or might just be of a really high complexity and require that additional thought and planning. So when the proper amount of planning is done, that's when we move forward. So it could really differ, but we're in the process of nailing down some timelines that we're going to share.
So just to follow up, so when does the code of silence come down for vendors working with the department? When are you going to, because
right.
its duration could be a problem.
Yeah, I would assume that would not change from the current process, right? So I mean, that's going to be when the solicitation hits the streets, right?
So you'll find as today, when an S1BA is approved, that's put out there, that's published. And so as a project moves through each phase, that information will be published and that will become public. We anticipate that the vendors will start to be engaged at some level of stage 2 and definitely in stage 3. Because the other big piece there is that procurement is moving into the overall process of project approval, right? Today, you do project approval and then you move into procurement. This is one complete process, so that at the end of approval, you have a procurement, which means that procurement has to get engaged very early on. So you'll find that during late stages of 2 and definitely in stage 3, we'll be reaching into the vendor community for input and assistance and looking at what are those right solutions. The other thing, and just to set the stage for today, is that, you know, as Patrick indicated, they'll be going over stage 1 and 2 documentation. Stage 3 and 4 are still in the process of being finalized and developed. So those we will be coming back out and presenting to you sometime this summer. But those are not yet in place.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrea. So, any other questions on the stage gate model? Maybe we can flip back to the stage gate model. Graham?
One of the changes that was mentioned is that the approval comes after procurement rather than before the procurement.
Correct.
Can you talk to the potential risk that you get through procurement and the result of the next step is your development project?
Right. I can touch on that if you want. Yeah. So we've heard this question before. It's actually a really good question. But what you're looking at here is a progressive approval, right? So The legislature is going to, they're going to have that information, right? They're going to have information from the stage gate deliverables, and our critical partners at the Department of Finance are also going to be engaged at that approval process. So they're going to see the business problem. Everybody's going to agree that there's a business case there in order to move forward. So the way I would look at it is I wouldn't really think of it that way so much as it's a progressive approval. So by the time you get to that stage, you know, we should have done the adequate amount of planning, and we should have done our due diligence to not be that far off scale from what we've already communicated. And so we're hoping that when we go forward with the budget request for support of the ultimate solution, that we've already been in communication, that we've already set the stage with our stakeholders for no big surprises, right? There shouldn't be any surprises of monumental value at that point. So that's the idea, is to plan better and to collaborate up front. So
The way this looks, and unless I'm reading this incorrectly, is driving procurement to an RFP policy. Now, in stage 2, in the middle, it says POTS, existing, custom cloud. What if there's a solution out there that meets all those, not the custom part, but POTS existing, and it's offered through cloud, and it's available to SLP? Would the department have to go through stages 3 and 4 just for kicks?
right, no, so what so you're still going to be able to use all those leverage procurement vehicles and other procurement vehicles. Those aren't going away as a result of the stage gate model and the new project approval lifecycle. So there can be multiple different types of procurements going on. What this picture represents is reportable IT projects and with reportable IT procurement. So either IFVs or RFPs. However, you know, our new model will support existing other procurement vehicles. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Stage gate model, before I move on? Okay, great. Next slide, please. Okay, so what this is the IT project approval lifecycle from a procurement view. And so what this does is this shows each stage of the stage gate model and really kind of what moves on from stage 1, stage 2, and forward when building the procurement perspective. And so what you have is the business problem really comes out of stage 1, so that's what you have in the stage 1 business analysis that carries forward into your procurement as an elaboration and discussion of the business problem. And stage 2 is really where the market research gets conducted. So that could be in the form of an RFI or some type of formal market research, or it could be in the form of any type of market research that I touched on earlier. And you get into some more information. So you have the upfront parts of your staffing planning. You document the current state of the agency or state entities' business processes and systems that support those business processes. There's the procurement strategy, which I kind of already touched on. We get into the first steps of procurement and what is your strategy for purchasing your solution. The mid-level requirements are addressed there, and those mature in stage 3. Mid-level requirements will mature into solution requirements, and so we've come up with a guide with some guidance on that to have some structure in that process. And then we get a high-level schedule, again, as I touched on earlier in the stage gate model that comes out of that. That information feeds into your stage 3 procurement analysis, where we've really, from a procurement perspective, are starting to develop not only our solicitation, but we're developing our cost model, we're developing our statement of work that will be utilized for the project contract. We're talking about those solution requirements, as I touched on. The evaluation method, we're going to help in the stage gate model. Within the scope of the STAR project, we're going to be talking about different evaluation methods and how we use the right evaluation method for the right type of project. So we're going to be looking at different types of project from a technology perspective and from a business perspective, and saying, does your evaluation model fit to help get you what you're looking for in the ways of a solution and meeting your business need? And then key action dates will be developed in the stage 3. So that feeds into the solution analysis stage 4, where the vendor is selected, contract management plan is initiated at that point, and then we, as I said earlier, we baseline the cost, schedule, and scope. So this is really just another view from more of a procurement lens on the project approval lifecycle and the 4 stages that are present in the project approval lifecycle. So this is, I call this document, this slide here, the ring of approval. So what this is this is really just trying to communicate the consistency of the process. One thing that we set forth to do when we developed the stage gate model for STAR is some of the processes that we wanted to integrate into that model, right? And so some of our guiding principles were to increase collaboration, get rid of throwing things over the fence. One of the pain points that we had was, you know, agencies and state entities, when we collaborated with them, said, you know, we send things in, and we might not hear something for a while, and there's not a whole lot of collaboration and a whole lot of guidance there. And so by implementing this model, you'll see where we've taken advantage for what we've called those opportunities for engagement. So at the beginning of each stage, we have what's called a preliminary assessment. And in stage 1, which I'll be going over with you guys here very shortly, we have a reportability assessment. And that was really a set of questions right out of the state administrative manual that lends towards reportability. So does this particular IT project going to be a reportable project to the Department of Technology from an oversight perspective? And that was really our first opportunity to introduce some rigor and some scalability to the process. And so we took advantage of that, and I'll be sharing that with you here shortly. The preliminary assessment is a set of questions that we ask before at the front of every stage gate deliverable. And the purpose was to come up with a list of questions that can help mitigate risk early in the process. So we got to brainstorming and talking and thinking about, you know, what types of things should we be asking. Those are the questions that came out of those discussions with all of our agency and state entity members on the team, and CIOs and AIOs. So it's, you know, if I only knew these things earlier, it wouldn't have made me go and do rework, right? If I only knew these things were going to be important to you, I would have concentrated on them. And so in the preliminary assessment, we've taken a set of questions and we've let them know early that these are things we're going to care about. And this may trigger you into some work that you're going to need to do in future stages. So we're trying to deal with those in the preliminary assessment. I think it's going to be hopefully very successful. Collaborative development is really the concept of being in touch with one another, right? So it's to get rid of that throwing things over the fence. So once a preliminary assessment is received, the Department of Technology and its critical partners knows that the agency or state entity wants to pursue this particular proposal. And so we can set forth on a collaborative development with them. We know what we're going to be expecting, so why don't we talk, why don't we share that information that we're looking for. And that's not just with the oversight group within the Department of Technology, but our critical partners as well. So our Office of Information Security, our Enterprise Architecture Office, and others, right? So collaborative development is really allowing the Department of Technology in a consultative fashion to put agencies and state entities in contact with individuals they need to be in contact with, and to help bring things to light early and often, really to help guide them through the process. So that's really, you know, collaborative development is just a fancy word for that. And then the collaborative review process takes place at each gate. And so at the end of each stage, when a stage gate deliverable has been reviewed and it was set to be approved or not, right, there will be a meeting, a formalized meeting with the agency and state entity and all critical partners who are part of that review. So we're taking a look at the business stakeholders, the sponsors are present, Department of Technology and all their critical partners are present. Everybody's in the room at the same time, so we can have a formal gate review. And in those reviews, we'll communicate any deficiencies that happen to be still present. We can discuss conditions of approval. So some of the approvals may carry conditions. And so those conditions will be documented. So a condition of approval out of stage 1 might be, we're going to approve you out of your stage 1, we agree you have a business problem, but we'd like you to take a look at this alternative in stage 2. So a condition of your approval is to go forth and analyze that as an alternative on your project. So that's just a quick little example. So outside of the collaborative review, there'll be a formal communication of any of those conditions or recommendations of approval back to the agency or state entity director, and it really allows for everybody to be in the same room and hear the same thing at the same time, as opposed to trying to communicate those items via a letter or some type of in writing only thing. So that's really the cycle. And one of the goals here with this process being designed this way is really to have it be repeatable. One of our guidelines, our guiding principles was to, you know, let's put something in place that's repeatable and that people will understand. So after a couple times through, we understand what's next. Now it's time for our collaborative review, now it's time for our preliminary assessment, and so on and so forth. So that's the process itself. So now I'm going to walk you through the stage 1 business analysis. You have handouts in front of you of the actual deliverable form itself. I encourage that you follow along with your handouts. Some of the screen prints that we're going to have up here aren't necessarily large enough to follow along with successfully, and so it might help to follow along with the handouts in there. At the end of the actual presenting of the deliverable, I'm going to have an open period for questions and answers, so I ask that you please write your questions down, and I'll be glad to answer your questions at the end of the presentation of the Stage 1 business analysis. So, okay, so to start off all the deliverables in the stage gate model, we start off with some general information, right? So from general information capacity, we have the agency or state entity name. A lot of this is data capture type information. We have an organizational code that we track that was part of our structure from a government perspective. The proposal name, we ask for a short proposal description that really tries to shy away from technology but focuses on the business problem at this point, because that's what we're doing here. We're establishing the business need that needs to be met here. We have a proposed start date. We have some information on whether or not the agency or state entity believes this is above or below their delegated cost threshold, and then we have some submittal information. This information is important so that we know who to contact. Obviously, from an oversight perspective, we know who to get in touch with in order to communicate further about this. So that's the same with the submittal information as well. Below that, we have submission type. So because in the stage gate model, we allow the ability for agencies and state entities to update their proposal. Because remember, this is a living, breathing document until you exit stage 4. So at any stage, updates can be made. So we want to know from a Department of Technology's perspective, is this a new submission that we have never seen before? Or is this an updated submission pre-approval? Because there's an iterative review process, and so agencies and state entities are encouraged to make updates as they learn more information. So that's why we have the ability here to make updates to previously approved or even previously approved stage gate deliverables. And I'll get into that a little bit later. The sections updated was simply for our use to be able to make things clearer to our agency and our Department of Technology critical partners, for when they're reviewing, they know the information that's been updated at a glance, right, rather than trying to page through the entire deliverable to try to figure out where things were changed. And then there's a summary of changes section there that allows the submitter to elaborate a little bit and share with us the types of changes that were made to the particular deliverable since the first time we've seen it. One new feature on this new form, what you're looking at right now is a Word template that was released with the policy, so I wanted to touch on that before I forget. The actual stage gate deliverables will be in an InfoPath form, which is a Microsoft Forms data form, which is for picking up structured data. So it's a tool in the InfoPath suite, in the Microsoft suite. So, but this is a Word template. In the future, with this particular release, we added the ability to attach our executive approval transmittal right there. So in the new stage gate deliverables that Star developed, you'll see the ability to attach documents right there. And those documents will remain tied to that document, and they'll be continually able to be referenced when they're being reviewed. So. Okay, so this is the preliminary assessment part of stage 1 business analysis. This is where we get into that preliminary assessment that I spoke of on that ring picture. So this is the first part of the preliminary assessment for stage 1 is the reportability assessment, where we ask a set of questions about reportability that are directly out of the state administrative manual. Are we anticipating a budget request to support this? Is this based on legislative mandate? Is the proposal involve a new acquisition, like I said, based upon legislative mandate or to exceed their delegated cost threshold? So each agency and state entity has a delegated cost threshold that some of you may be familiar with that makes things, or things that are above that, proposals and projects that go above the delegated cost threshold as far as cost goes, are reportable to the Department of Technology for oversight. And so we asked this set of questions and to assess whether or not we believe that the project's going to end up being reportable to the Department of Technology right up front. And when I go through the scalability model after the presentation of this form, you'll see how we applied that to the scalability that I spoke of earlier and the rigor there. And then we have planned reporting exemption requests. So If it's going to be anticipated to be reportable, we want to know whether or not that agency or state entity feels very capable in managing the project itself outside of the authority of Department of Technology, and so will they be asking for a exemption from reporting? That's a current mechanism that exists in policy today for agencies and state entities to be able to request an exemption from the reporting. And so that gives us a clue in early that that might be something that we'd be expecting in the future. So the rest of the preliminary assessment after the reportability assessment we call the impact assessment, where we're trying to really take a look at information that we found useful early in the stage 1 business analysis. So, you know, we have questions around the funding source. Has the funding source for this particular proposal been identified or not? That's going to tell us about potential special needs in regards to the funding source and the maybe alternate approvals that are required if they're required to get that funding. And so we have the funding area there where the agency or state entity can check, this is where I've identified my funding, or other, and then the fiscal year in which they believe that they're going to gain that funding or that they need the funding to support this particular initiative. So we talk about whether or not there's the possibility of incurring any financial sanctions or penalties as a result of this, of not implementing this solution. That keys us in again to, we got to pay attention to this. There's a potential for penalties or sanctions to be imposed if we don't, you know, it talks about, speaks to the timeline and the urgency in which approval might need to take place. And then, is the proposal anticipated to have high public visibility? Is this something that might be a little touchy, or have you have a high public visibility, and anything that we really need to pay attention to about this particular issue? And then, on a scale from 1 to 3, we talk about how well our business process is documented. This is one of those examples I provided earlier where we bring things to light that may initially seem insignificant, but what we're trying to point out, particularly with question 4 there about the business process documentation, is, hey, there's a requirement in stage 2 that your business processes be well documented. And so, if nothing else, a lot of these questions are going to facilitate conversations. So when we get into the stage 1 collaborative review at the end of the gate, right? I'm sorry. When we receive this proposal and we get it, and we get into the stage 1 gate 1 collaborative review, we'll be able to point out, hey, as a requirement in stage 2, you know, your business processes need to be documented and well understood in a fashion that's much more granular and much greater than it currently is in the feasibility study process. So we're trying to bring those things to light. So a lot of these questions serve that purpose for that discussion, is just to bring things to light and allow us to mitigate that risk early and communicate expectations in an early way. So business sponsors and key stakeholders, this is the area where we talk about who owns this particular proposal from the business perspective. So who are the business areas? What are the business areas, executive sponsors, business owners of the processes that are impacted, and any key stakeholders that might be impacted by this particular proposal. So that's both internal and external to your organization. So is it other agencies and state entities? Is it you know, interfaces or whatever that I have to worry about, and business processes that might need to be considered, and so those individuals are brought into play. And that's very important when we get into the collaborative reviews, to make sure that everybody's invited and everybody has a say in what's going on when we reach out to the stakeholder community. Business drivers, we want to have the agency or state entity elaborate about what's driving this particular need from a business perspective. Are we trying to increase revenue? Are we trying to avoid additional costs? Are we trying to make improvements to our processes and systems? Is it based, again, there's the federal mandate information. Business driver is state or federal mandated information. Some of the new information we've added that you might not have seen before in the previous stage 1 business analysis is the security as a business driver. So in the collaboration with our ISO's office, security can be a business driver, and so we've added the security there as a driver of the business issue or problem trying to be resolved. In section 1.6, we get into statutes or legislation. So tell us about the particulars of the statutes or legislation that's driving or might be related to this particular business issue. So we ask for the bill number, we ask for a legal reference. And the reason that we ask for that information is so that we can go out and research it, right? Because often an agency or state entity might believe that they're impacted by a piece of legislation, and often they're right. But sometimes things are missed, or sometimes there's a misunderstanding, and so that provides the Department of Technology with the opportunity, at least, to go out and interpret that legislation and whether or not everybody's in agreement about how it truly impacts this particular business issue at hand. Section 1.7 is program background and context, so it really gets into telling us about the business programs that are affected by this particular initiative. Give us a background, place this particular business program in context with the business problem or opportunity that's trying to be solved. So we get a small, concise description of the business program background, place it into context, talk about the business that we're responsible for. This area is responsible for a particular piece of business, so we get a better understanding of how that particular business program and all the affected business programs that were referenced earlier are affected by this proposal. So what this section really does is it really forces the submitter to think about how is everybody impacted by this change, not just my particular area, but all the business sponsors and all the key stakeholders that we identified earlier. How are they uniquely impacted by this particular problem or opportunity? And so that's what that section 1.7 is really about. Section 1.8 is strategic business alignment. So tell us how this business problem, this issue, and addressing this problem gets you closer to your strategic vision. So talk to us about how the business problem that you're elaborating on and you're talking about and your business goals related to that problem really align with where you're going from a strategic perspective. And so we have a request here that's new also. We ask, well, when was the last time that you really took a look and planned strategically and have an updated strategic plan? Because if you're not planning as an organization, then you're not going to do a very successful job of picking and choosing the proposals and the initiatives that you really want to carry out and which ones have the priority to meet your strategic goals as an organization. So business problem and opportunity summary, 1.9 is where there's an elaboration about the business problem or opportunity itself. So why is this business problem or opportunity important to address at this time? Why is this issue important? So there's an elaboration about why it's important. What's the impact? What type of pain is it causing you as an organization? So tell us about that. Tell us about the opportunity you're trying to seize and why it's important. So that's really what this is about, is tell us a little bit of background about the particular problem or opportunity you're trying to seize. Why is it important to tackle now? Why are we doing this now? And tell us about the pain points that's really causing for you. So based upon the business problems or opportunities, we talk about we have a business problem or opportunity and objectives table that we've set forth here for users to actually start developing what I was touching on earlier, is your first level business requirements. It's your objectives. So what are you trying to achieve? What are you going to measure yourselves against for success with this particular initiative? What are you trying to achieve? And so we added a structured table here that really allows the agency or state entity to begin tracking, really with an ID number, what's the business problem or opportunity? What is the objective related to that business problem or opportunity? There's some traceability that starts at the first level of the project approval lifecycle, and that's in the stage 1 business analysis. So we talk about the objective. What metric are you going to be measuring that objective against, and what's the baseline for that objective? So when doing objective development, one thing we train on is to make sure that the objectives are SMART, and that's an acronym. And so SMART means specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And so we provided a table here for them to really make that easy. And in our instructions, we outline the SMART guidelines and give some tips and techniques on how to develop SMART objectives. And we also train on that in our stage 1 training as well. So this is really where we start developing our first level requirements in stage 1 from a business perspective, talking about the business problem, talking about the objective. It's a very important part of the section. That's why I get so excited about it. So next. So we talked earlier, and one thing you're going to hear a lot of the term organizational readiness in this presentation today. Another word you're going to hear a lot is collaboration. You know, from an organizational readiness perspective, one of the things that was most important to us was these new couple of sections that we added here. So these next sections that we've added are really new to this new and improved stage 1 business analysis, which is business and stakeholder capacity. So one thing we talk about is really, what is the agency's or state entity's capacity in these business program areas, in their IT shop, from a leadership perspective, right, to be successful with this particular initiative. So we take a look at, you know, priorities of the business program. Sure, we want to do this thing, it's a great idea, but you know, it's not as important as this other stuff I'm doing, which is keeping the lights on, right? I want to make sure that this stuff is my bread and butter. We really want to do this, so we make them talk about it. So talk to us about your priorities. Talk to us about whether or not you share resources with other, you know, be it vendor resources, state staff resources. Are you sharing resources across your organization to support this particular initiative, because that adds to the risk and the potential for success. We talk about external stakeholder involvement, so tell us about that in a narrative fashion. Talk to us about newer changes to business process. So we have an opportunity here to engage in a conversation with the submitter about, hey, have you thought about whether or not this proposal is going to create new business processes? Have you thought about the changes that it'll make to your existing business processes? Let's talk about that. And if so, please provide a narrative, a concise description of the thought that you carried out and how you believe that you're going to mitigate some issues related to creation of new business processes and the resources that you're going to have available to do those things, those pieces of work. So it's really prompting thought, mitigating risk early, particularly in the area of organizational readiness and stakeholder capacity from a business perspective. So 112 is organizational readiness, so we talk about that governance structure. So do you have the ability to make decisions? Is your agency or state entity successful at making decisions? All too often projects stall because nobody's going to be there to make the decisions, the tough decisions that need to be made, and so we talk about that. We talk about the maturity of those processes. We talk about leadership participation, so tell us, from a leadership perspective, how engaged is your leadership in this? We all realize how important it is to have leadership at the very top of the organization, to the very project itself, engaged and very supportive. And it's a big deal, and it means a lot to a project's success. And so we've stressed that here with the STAR project, very much so. We get into resources, capacity, skills, and knowledge. So tell us about the resources specifically that you have planned to perform the work that's necessary, because we have a lot more good work that has to be of a high quality that's going to take place in the future stages. So we're not just looking at the project DD&I, right? We're taking a look at, you're in stage 1, so you have stage 2, you have stage 3 work to do. Who's going to do that work, and do you have the appropriate resources keyed and pegged to do that work, and are they prepared, and do they have experience? And so we'll have conversations about that, and if there's opportunities to potentially you know, help out in any way with augmenting resources, then we'll have that discussion. Hey, you know, maybe you ought to put in for a budget request to augment resources in stage 3 to help you with requirements elicitation and things that you need to do to build your procurement vehicle. Some smaller agencies and state entities, quite frankly, aren't prepared for the amount of work that's required, and so this gives us an opportunity to start having those discussions about that and to start mitigating it early. We're in stage 1, we're talking about stage 2 and 3. So that communication is going to hopefully be very lend to the success of the projects moving forward. So this is more of the organizational readiness section. We talk about training and organizational change management. So we talk about the resources, processes, and skills in place. Do you have the right people in place to deal with the OCM aspect that this particular proposal is going to cause? Does this proposal affect program staff in multiple geographical locations? So having done projects where stakeholders are not, you know, some of the key players are at disparate locations, we all know by participating in projects like that how risky that can be, how communications break down in an organization itself when everybody's in the same building, right? So if we have external stakeholders that are in multiple geographic locations, multiple counties, down south, you know, that adds to the risk of the implementation, and it helps to challenge the communications. And so that's one thing we want to focus on early from a readiness perspective is, are there multiple geographic locations, and how do you plan on mitigating that issue? Let's have a conversation on that. From an enterprise architecture perspective, do you have a documented target? We talk about how important it is to actually know where you want to go from an architectural perspective before you start throwing disparate technologies into your footprint, right? So we start talking about, do you have a documented target architecture? And how does this proposal, how are you going to work with this proposal to get yourself towards that target? So we start having these conversations early. And then we have a new project management maturity assessment that has been added to our California project management methodology. And this organizational project management maturity assessment itself, oh, thank you, Alicia. Perfect timing. We think we've done this before or something, right? So the organizational project management maturity assessment has been added to the California project management methodology, otherwise known as the CAPMM. And what this is going to be is a tool for the Department of Technology to assess that organizations will fill this out. And what this tool really does is it provides a score to their ability to successfully manage projects. So it takes a look at different fundamental parts of the organization, the governance, the processes, and actually there's an assessment at the bottom there that talks about the particular project manager themselves that you're proposing to manage this project and his or her skills and abilities to successfully manage the project. This tool is going to allow us to see that maybe there's some help that might be needed in this area. Some agencies and state entities don't have large, robust project management shops. They don't have the skill sets to successfully manage projects. And so what this is going to help us to do is to help mitigate that. And one way that we are going to be able to mitigate that now is we have a new statewide project management office that's been set up at the Department of Technology as an option for managing state projects for organizations that lack the ability to successfully manage projects on their own. And so they can engage with the project management office and potentially be an option for making the project be a success. So that's the project management maturity assessment. And so we're just about done now with the stage 1 business analysis. I'm going to touch on, I mentioned earlier how we talked about scalability and how we've introduced scalability, and I want to take a moment to talk about this in a little bit greater detail. One of the pain points of the agencies and state entities when we engaged with them was, no matter the size of my proposal, the size of my project, no matter how complex it is or how non-complex it is, you treat us all the same. All the proposals have the same amount of rigor, require the same amount of data to be provided on the approval documents. And so we took that to heart, and we thought, how can we work with the agencies and state entities in a proactive fashion to develop and build in some scalability into the model. And so that's what we did in stage 1 via the reportability assessment, and I touched on that. So for proposals that come out anticipated to be non-reportable, there's a limited submission or subset of the stage 1 business analysis that I went over with you that has to be submitted to the Department of Technology for review. We've taken those other sections that are still important to fill out and really allowed the agency or state entity's director to then have the authority to approve those sections. So it's not that the sections don't have to be filled out, and it's not that they're not important. It's just that if they're anticipated to be non-reportable, the Department of Technology really needs that information from a portfolio management perspective, right? We need to know what's going on in the state. We need to know what's going on as far as your portfolio and how busy you are, how much your capacity is stretched in certain ways and different programs. So we ask for a limited set of information to just get that portfolio view. Anticipated to be reportable, they have to provide the full submission, including all the organizational readiness sections as well. So they submit the stage 1 business, both go to the stage 1 business, both of the stage 1 business analysis have to go to the Department of Technology, regardless if they're reportable or not, and they both need to be approved by the Department of Technology from a strategic standpoint. And then the delegated approvals are then the delegated, or those that are anticipated to be non-reportable. The approval of the remaining stages and gates in the approval life cycle is delegated to that agency or state entity directorate for approval. Very commonly, like internal FSR is done now. And then for those that are anticipated to be reportable, if all that remains the same, The approval is required by the Department of Technology and critical partners at the subsequent stages and gates that I presented to you earlier. So that's the scalability that we added for stage 1. When Manver comes up and presents the stage 2 alternatives analysis, he'll further talk about some scalability that we added at that stage as well. So that's the stage 1 business analysis. I know